Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I know it's been a little bit since I've uploaded a video. I've been moving, as you can probably see here, and I've also been working on some big things for this channel coming very, very soon. So there's gonna be some new videos soon that I think are gonna be really, really strong, and so keep an eye out for those. But today I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about for the past week or so. So a video game studio, an indie studio, reached out to me and wanted just my thoughts and opinions on their game story that they're working on. And so they sent me a summary over and I was looking through it, and what they had was a pretty strong game story. Like, from the sense of a player playing the game, there were moments that were clearly action moments that would work very well. There were clear sort of bosses and stages that were going to work. And so as a video game story, it was going to work, but it wasn't necessarily, a story that was going to stick with you, right? Like, it wasn't this sort of deeper story that you left that game thinking, oh wow, it wasn't just the gameplay, but the story was also fantastic. And it was weird because there was nothing, it didn't seem like there was anything wrong with what they had. Like, it worked structurally. Their characters wanted something and were on a trajectory, and they encountered obstacles, and all of those sort of basic elements were there. So what was the problem? So really what it came down to was there was no real philosophical conflict, and their characters had no real beliefs. So what they had was a very black and white conflict in the story, where these guys were clearly the bad guys and these guys were clearly the good guys. And you never really had any sort of challenge philosophically in that. You really just had, okay, this is our character, they are clearly the good guy of this story, and they are fighting these different obstacles and monsters and different things as they move towards what they want and solving this story and finishing the game. But what they were looking for, what this studio was looking for, was something that was actually deep and memorable and interesting. And so what I said was that the real problem came down to the fact that their characters didn't have any beliefs that they were truly going to struggle with. The villains didn't have any real beliefs that were actually challenging to the player or to the protagonist of this video game story. And so it was just sort of flat. It wasn't interesting in the sense of actually challenging anything on a philosophical level. And I think that is what a lot of stories are missing. It's possible that is what your screenplay is missing right now. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to think about the different beliefs of the characters in your story. If you have a protagonist and they are very clearly the good guy of the story, then you have the villain and they are very clearly the bad guy of the story, and there's no sort of thought put into that. There's no sort of actual challenging on a philosophical level of the characters, then I think you're going to have a problem. So let me kind of explain what I'm talking about here. Your audience or your reader or your player, they are not going to be challenged by the actual obstacles that a character faces in a story. The external obstacles that a character faces in a story, these are plot elements that don't truly make the story memorable. What really is going to make your story memorable and interesting and thought-provoking is when you have your characters encounter these antagonistic characters. It is a clash of beliefs as much as it is a clash of, actually externally fighting in some way. So rather than building stories that are very black and white, create stories where there are costs to what the good guys want, to what your protagonists want. There are benefits and there are clear advantages to what the antagonists want and what they seek, and there's truth in what they are saying, right? And when you create this, then you actually create something that's interesting and thought-provoking, and then your player or your audience or your reader or whatever, they are no longer just watching an external event take place. They're interested in what's going to happen in regards to the beliefs of the characters in the story, in regards to the philosophical conflict, and ultimately what becomes the theme of this story. And so that's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about how you can legitimately give advantages to what the antagonist of your story believe. What about what they believe makes sense? What about what they believe is understandable? What about what they believe can work from their point of view, or that they think has clear advantages that will help the world or help their situation or whatever? What are the costs to what the protagonists want? Because if you just have this sort of clear protagonist, antagonist, the protagonist is completely correct, the antagonist is completely incorrect, it's boring. There's no play, there's no challenging. Just as you challenge a video game player in the actual fights and the external battles, that is the challenge. You also want to challenge your screenwriting audience or your novel audience or your video game audience. You want to challenge them in the way of how they think and in the way of what they think about the beliefs that are taking place within this conflict. If you want to have better examples of this, I actually made a video called The Purpose of Conflict. You can check out that video in the description of this one. But in that video, I take examples from film, some of my favorite films, and I talk about how these characters are pitted against each other in regards to their beliefs, and then how that ends up working in the actual plot of the story and the external obstacles and these sorts of things. So that's what I wanted to bring to you today. If you're struggling with your story, if you're struggling to give it that level of meaning, if you think you've hit all of these structural points, but you still feel like there's something missing, then take a second to look at the beliefs of your characters and the philosophical conflict of your story. What is your story actually trying to say? What is your story saying about the world? What does it mean for the world or for your reader or for your audience when they go away from your story? What are you saying to them about how the world works? What statement are you making, or what question are you leaving them with to consider? Doing this is actually how you can get a story to stick with an audience in the long term. I think you have, when you're a child, right, we look at very, archetypal stories, and we latch onto those, right? Stories like The Lion King. I guess you could even kind of put Lord of the Rings in that. Some of these sort of good and evil stories, some of these stories about being courageous or being confident or these sorts of things. Because when we are younger, these are still beliefs and points of view that we need to cultivate, that we haven't actually, done so ourselves, and we need to see examples of people being courageous, being brave, standing in the face of adversity, these sorts of things. Then as we get older, these things change in a way. They go from these sort of very simplistic archetypes to how do you actually handle some of these complex elements of adult life and of the real world and of these sorts of things. And you can actually go into these ideas through story, and you can look at how the world works now. Snowpiercer is a great example of a director and a writer who is trying to look at the world and in an analogy and using symbols and using this sort of contained story and saying, like, what does this say about where we are, and what does this say about what we should do about the system that we currently are in? And I think that that's something that you can do, and that's something that is very powerful if you can actually pull that off, because it's not just people reading a philosophy book or reading a book on politics or reading a history book, but you actually create this symbiosis between how people think and act and the ideas that they think about, and when you clash them together in an actual meaningful way, you can create a really strong story. So that's what I wanted to leave you today with. New videos are coming very soon, so keep out on the lookout for that. Finally getting settled in at this new place, and I'll see you all very soon.